go ahead and start the workshop meeting for May 3rd. Jenny, if you want to take the roll?
Councilmember Thorson?
Here.
Councilmember Peterson? Here. Councilmember Wong?
Here.
Councilmember Cole?
Here.
Mayor Furlong?
Your quorum is present. Motion to adopt the agenda.
So moved, Your Honor.
Moved by Councilmember Peterson,
Second.
second by Councilmember Wong. Any discussion? If not, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion, or the agenda is adopted. We have one topic, and that's the enclosures for establishments serving alcohol outdoors. And I'll turn it over to City Manager Stark.
Thank you, Mayor Furlong and council members. So when I arrived at the city of North St. Paul, Max Diner was on the cusp of, planning and hoping to open this summer, planning to open soon. And they had come to me with a concern that the fencing requirements around outdoor patios seemed onerous to them. I read the requirements, and based on my experience in other communities, it seemed a little bit onerous to me as well. But I didn't have a lot of experience in other communities, so I had asked Brandy Howe and the planning staff at WSB to take a look at what other communities recommend or require, and then give us some thoughts and some options for moving forward. So I think with that, I would just pass it on to Brandy.
Welcome, Brandy.
That down. Thanks for the introduction. So I had our planning assistant, Jared Johnson, help me do a little bit of research on behalf of Mr. Stark. And your existing ordinance basically states that if there is going to be an outdoor patio, the area must be enclosed by a 6-foot tall fence, and it should have a lock and gate, a gate with a lock, rather. So based on the inquiry from Max Steiner, we did the research of other communities, and we looked at City of Stillwater, City of Rosemont, Robbinsdale, and those were the only ones. And then based on a conversation that I had with Mr. Stark yesterday, we also looked at White Bear Lake to see what their regulations were, and they did not have any, and it was based up in a follow-up conversation with Jared Johnson. There's not that many communities that he did the research upon that had regulations for this type of enclosure for outdoor seating. So we'll just kind of look at the ones that did.
And maybe I can just pause for 1 second. I think that the rationale for the enclosure, were you going to cover that?
No, go ahead.
The rationale for the enclosure is obviously it's a place where a patio where typically alcohol would be served. And the thought is that, you don't want to make it easy for somebody inside the patio that has an alcoholic beverage to just hand it to somebody outside the patio for consumption, to an underage person or, somebody that really isn't a patron. And so that's why the 6-foot fence was enacted for that purpose. That's my understanding.
It just seems odd to me that a 6-foot fence would hinder people from passing something between go ahead, sorry.
One of the other reasons is when you apply for a liquor license, what you have to do is be able to delineate where that alcohol will be served. And so I know at times there's been discussion about, well, could I buy a beer and then just, walk off and walk around with it? And that isn't an option in Minnesota. And so, whether it should be a 6-foot fence or planters or something, patios have become a more common place to serve. You want to be outside. How do you delineate it? And so this is part of that process. And so if there isn't a demarcation of sorts, if you will, it becomes hard to say, well, this is the premise, this
Right.
spot. I think what I've saw once COVID hit, candidly, is things did loosen up a little bit on that. We saw a lot more, say, sidewalk service and things of that nature. That was during the emergency orders when we flexed a little bit on that. But I know that I've encountered the conversation on this point of, well, how much do you really need? Is it really an effort to stop the passing over the beer. Is any of that going to stop this? Probably not. But it is an idea of, it demarcates the premise where alcohol can be served. And that's really the point of it.
Yep, and so Minnesota statute requires that the spaces be compact and contiguous, but there really isn't a whole lot else in terms of what the boundary needs to be, if any. So cities can impose further regulations, such as requiring a fence, which you have now. So we looked at Stillwater, and I've actually been up there recently in some of their situations, and they don't have any requirements for patio enclosures. They do have several patios with different types of enclosures. They have elevated patios, planter boxes, iron fencing with brick columns, wood fencing with gates. Here's some other examples. Robbinsdale, they require a 3-foot fence. In Rosemont, there's no fence requirement, but if they have one, it has to be wrought iron, so it's more of an aesthetic thing as opposed to keeping the alcohol confined. So options for you to consider are, basically, do you want to have any enclosure? And if you do, what kind? Maybe it's a buffer. You might want to limit height if you do have an enclosure. You might want to consider whether or not you need a gate to keep people in and if it needs a lock. And then we could also add additional conditions that would give City Council some flexibility in terms of each individual applicant for a liquor license. So here's just some images for you to take a look at. So there's the tall wrought iron fence that you could pass the beer through, a little bit more casual dining space. So the shorter fence, just basically demarcating the area. Planter boxes. A tall fence, just a different variety, but that doesn't appear to have any enclosure, or a gate, rather. So that is the end of my presentation.
Yeah, and I would just add that we asked Police Chief Babenroth if he had concerns. He wasn't able to attend tonight, but he said from a law enforcement perspective, we have not noticed a significant problem with customers purchasing alcoholic beverages and taking the beverages off the business premises or passing alcoholic beverages to non-customers outside of the business patio area. Public safety is not enhanced or reduced by having the 6-foot fence requirement. However, maintaining some type of liquor establishment fence requirement is important to public safety because it provides a structure defining the alcoholic beverage serving area. Lowering the fence to 3 feet is advantageous to public safety because it would allow easier access for any officer or emergency responder to access an incident in the business or patio area. So those were his comments.
So to me, it sounds like it's more of a delineation of, make it the area where drinking is allowed. I mean, that's, I think last year when the bars did the temporary, where they put up the little fencing or the little chains to make it an area that kind of ropes off an area where the drinking is allowed. And I don't see a 6-foot high fence deterring people from passing drinks through. Soren, do you know, does a 6-foot high fence come from anywhere, or is that just something the city?
I don't know, other than what I've traditionally seen is, at least in residential areas, 6 foot seems to be sort of the cap on what you'll allow for a fence in terms of height. A lot of the fence, I don't have any survey results, but I do see 6 feet as just kind of being a maximum height in a lot of areas. I guess I haven't seen it in terms of a required height. That was new to me from your code's perspective, that it required a 6-foot fence. And again, I assume it was because of the idea of presenting the passability of the alcohol or something like that. But I'm not really sure it served as much of a deterrent in that respect. And I did have a chance to talk to Phil, and what he said was it's more of a demarcation from his standpoint, and candidly, from a law enforcement perspective, if you come in and see something, it's easier to address it if you don't have to deal with a 6-foot fence, if it's, a little bit lower. My recollection is Phil supported actually having a lower fence. I hope I'm not misrepresenting that, but that's
That's what it kind of sounded like. He supported a smaller fence.
And that's what I've seen in other communities too. It's about demarking the area. And then candidly, you know, some of it is up to them, just the business, to police that on their own. I mean, it is their liquor license. They know what happens if booze starts to leave the premise. They know what happens if booze is being passed to minors. So, you know, some of these codes are written at a point when that was a little bit more problematic. The underage service has gone way down, in my opinion, from where it used to be. So I'm not sure.
Is that because you're older, or is that?
Could be, yeah, fair, fair. Everyone knows the penalties that are associated with it and the liability with it, and it's just not worth it.
Right, right. Anybody else?
Yeah, excuse me. Well, I think this is a good step forward. I mean, I would agree that I think our old, ordinance is a little too restrictive. I'm thinking about current patios. I know American Legion just spent quite a bit of money constructing a new beautiful patio, and it has a higher fence, but I don't know if they were doing that based off of our code or if that's just what they wanted to do. But I mean, that used to be just kind of like the front of their parking lot. Now there's no question that that's their patio. The fact that the fence is higher, I mean, I don't really think it needs to be, but if that was their choice, and if they did that because it was our existing ordinance, and they could have done a shorter fence like the examples that we have, I agree. I don't think that a wrought iron fence that you can easily reach through is preventing people sneaking alcohol through the gate. I don't think that was the intent. But there's Newman's patio, which basically is just a straight fence across. And I think they've, in the past, there was questions or issues about, the beverages or beer being stored in their bar area and how it was locked up. Well, that's probably more of a liquor ordinance deal, but I
I
mean.
think it's more of a security issue for them.
But the gate's locked, and when during busy times, they have some, like in the car show, there's usually someone there manning the door, checking IDs or making sure people are leaving their drinks within that area and not walking out. I know there's other establishments in the past that have inquired about patios, VFW, Sidewinders, maybe even the Polar Lounge underneath that kind of, I don't know, it's not like an awning area, but that overhang. And I think in the past they've been told no. Some establishments maybe don't have the area like some of the other places do, but there's a small area. So I think, if we can look at making it easier for these establishments to establish some sort of patio area that meets the state guidelines, I'm all supportive of it.
Councilmember Peterson?
Yeah, I agree with Councilmember Thorson. I don't want them to go into debt, trying to beautify their area. I mean, these are nice examples. I've seen them down in Rochester too, and they're very nice, but I don't know if the establishments have that, I'm sure they can do something, but I hope it's within their means. That's all I have, thanks.
Could I offer a suggestion on that line of thought? Those options that were part of the presentation are simply that. You could include a requirement that just simply states you need to have some sort of enclosure. You can do any variety of these. Could be a fence even, but a smaller one. And I would imagine that the 6-foot fence requirement, now that you're discussing some of the existing fences in the community, may had to do with the fact that probably they're in the alley or off of Sepulveda, which has that alley feel as opposed to off of more of the main street, where you would traditionally have a sidewalk cafe, and you certainly wouldn't want a 6-foot fence in that environment. But I think if you're looking for more flexibility, we can find a way to build that into the code without making it too costly for the applicant.
Yeah, I think the important thing here is delineation, making it a set patio area. And if they're consistent, or maybe not consistent, I was looking at some of these plantings, I mean, that looks nice. But I think we want to keep it, if the establishments were to use the patio area outside the establishments, I think it should be something that looks nice too for the downtown. Last year we threw picnic tables, and we're trying to help the bars as fast as we could, and because of the pandemic. But now that's over with, and they're not allowed to do that at this time, because that was a temporary ordinance that we declared during the pandemic. So right now, I think we need to kind of set a standard for the downtown, and I think the Planning Commission kind of looked at that. Maybe Councilmember Wong can touch on that.
Sure, yeah. I think Lisa Ritchie has been looking into different options to just present as examples for businesses, and to look at, something that has higher grade, commercial grade, I should say, materials. So in the weather or just through use, that they would be able to maintain, their aesthetic, their function. So I believe that's the direction, but there's not any specifics on, the design features that's going to maintain flexible.
Councilmember, are you done? Go ahead.
No.
Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah. So one thing I was thinking about too is, and we've had some discussion about this in the Planning Commission, is taking a look at a solution called parklets, or street cafes. The city of Minneapolis and many cities all over the country have this model. And it's basically businesses invest in expanding, some sort of deck, and it would go into a parking space. So it would provide opportunity for, folks to still walk through if they're going through downtown, but there's a designated area for dining that you can, delineate from the rest of the sidewalk. And I do believe some of their toolkits, they have those available. They provide some safety guidelines as well about, maybe putting up a concrete block here, 3 feet outside of the area. So it maintains, its safety for pedestrians and diners.
Brandy, do we have an example of the parklet? Was that part of your presentation or no?
It wasn't, but while you're discussing this, I know of some examples that exist. I could pull them up on Google Earth.
Sure. If we can do that, that'd be great.
Sure. And you probably have some places that you could point me to as well. Okay.
While she's looking that up, if I may, discuss a little bit about the points of cost and what the trade-off might be for that, having some sort of enclosure versus maybe not having an enclosure. My thought is, if a business is trying to expand their deck, and we require a fence, whether it's 6 feet or 3 feet, it can be any materials, the likelihood that maybe a business would only be able to afford something like aluminum versus if it was just open and it would save them a lot of money too. So I'm just kind of thinking about that trade-off versus, having any fence versus, just an open deck.
I just pulled up the term.
I've seen those on the east side of St. Paul. I think it was on Arcade Avenue. It was sitting outside on a parking spot.
Here's an actual example I've walked by before. This is in Iowa City.
Oh, yep.
So it's about one block of their downtown. They don't have a ton, I mean, this is a community that is a college town with 30-some thousand students, so there's always an issue with parking, but they decided that this was an important priority to provide outdoor seating. And so that's just an example of what they look like. And then I pulled up Google Images. And they come in a lot of different varieties. And then Lisa has provided to the Plan Commission the kind of how-to guide from, you said it was St. Paul? Minneapolis. It was very thorough, very informational. We could provide that in the future. Oh, here's another one that seems pretty typical. Something else to consider is the ordinance, if you decide to revise it. The regulations don't have to be quite as onerous within the ordinance itself, but the downtown design guidelines, which the Planning Commission intends to update in the near future, might be a place to add those aesthetic components. So the ordinance could be, you need to require something, you need to provide a demarcation of some sorts, but refer to this document for how to implement it.
Councilmember Cole? So we're looking at our ordinance right now and how it reads. It limits, I believe, the establishments down there right now in regards to allowing some sort of outdoor patio, similar to what they had last year. I don't think they could do what they did last year according to this ordinance.
In terms of providing alcohol or just allowing outdoor seating?
Allowed outdoor seating.
I'm not as familiar with that topic of whether or not it's allowed. I'd have to verify that. But the existing ordinance in terms of the alcohol requirement is that you shall have a 6-foot-tall fence if you want to have outdoor.
And I think maybe what the mayor's talking about is, during COVID, you allowed service areas in the public right-of-way, whereas I think this is contemplating that it would be on a property owner's property. Now, whether we were lax, I'm assuming we were lax on the rules on the 6-foot fence as well during COVID in that public right-of-way situation, knowing that it was intended to be temporary.
Yeah, I think we just, we allowed them to go out onto the public right away with very little restrictions in regards to, it looked like temporary tables, tents, sun shelters may be erected. Yeah, we're pretty relaxed in that.
And I think that was common.
So as we rewrite this ordinance, it sounds like we were looking at eliminating that 6-foot high fence, and what does that look like?
And I think, Brandy tried to present you with some options. There's some fence ranges in height, or doing it in a different way with planter boxes. As Brandy said, there could be an opportunity to have some flexibility to say, here are, the important thing is the spirit and intent, that you're delineating your area, and then here are 2 or 3 options for how you could do that. I do like the idea that there'd be the ordinance that would apply regardless of where you're at in the city. And then in the downtown district, there would be some extra requirements for some of the aesthetics over and above. I think that makes sense.
And it's my understanding that any license that would come forward for this sort of outdoor seating area would come to this body, and then you'd have the opportunity to give your input on their proposal. Is that correct?
I believe so, as part of the liquor license.
Can you say that again?
Oh, I was trying to explain that if anytime anybody would want to come forward with such a request for an outdoor seating area where they would serve alcohol, they would first need to come to this body to get approval of that liquor license, and then that would be your opportunity to impose conditions or react to their proposal.
Randy, is the current section that you've cited, is that in the zoning or is that in the liquor license?
That is in the liquor license.
So that is where we would handle it then, just as part of the liquor licensing. We should spell it out in the code, though, not do the case-by-case thing, just so that an applicant understands, here's what's expected of you when you apply for a liquor license. Yeah, we make this change in the liquor licensing, so when they come forward with the license, it's just right there.
Yeah, it's code section 117.120, B2. And it's, it's in there. So like if, just trying to think out loud here, an example would be like Roddy's on the corner. I know they also do have somewhat of a back area that they possibly could do a patio or something, but on the front, it's kind of a larger expansive area of a sidewalk versus if you go down a little farther, like in front of Newman's, it's just more of a narrow sidewalk, and they have their own patio area. But what Roddy's was allowed to do was kind of put that temporary fencing up. It was just kind of some road cones with some plastic chains, but they, could fit 3 or 4 tables in there. And so in that particular area, and I think that's kind of similar what's across the street with where Max Diner is going to be, it's this larger area. And so if they, is there a way we can write this code that says, if you can come forward to the council and present, an area that meets these qualifications, maybe strike out the height requirement and just highlight that it needs to be, delineated or, and in the case of like Roddy's, where if they want to do something separate, like in the parking stall, they don't have parking stalls right in front of their establishment. It would be, so it wouldn't be contiguous in that sense because it's like 6 or 7 feet away where there's the first angled parking. But if, I don't know how it's kind of a different can of worms, but at least if you can say, if you're looking at doing something like this, you have to meet certain requirements, like one, you can't block whatever the standard width of the sidewalk is.
Sure.
And then,
I
yeah.
think that you're touching on some really good points, and I'm questioning if this is a separate, maybe it's a combination, liquor license, but also right-of-way permitting, perhaps? I'm not sure how you would go about authorizing somebody to put a table on the public right-of-way. And then the contiguous part, I'd like to get Soren's opinion on that, and whether or not you're, during COVID, if some of these businesses that were putting patios out, if they are liquor serving establishments and how that has been functioning.
But if signs were put, like, let's say those first 3 stalls, I know it's public parking, but it's pretty common where you see, this parking is reserved for this establishment or whatever. Would that be kind of a workaround, or if you said, if Roddy's wanted to do one of those parklet, and they met all the requirements, and they want to use like 1 or 2 stalls, and to make it contiguous, you say these stalls are reserved for Roddy's parking only? I mean, I don't know if that's...
Yeah, I think it's been touched on. There's 2 issues. One, the fence. I look at the fencing issue as expanding land that you already control, so your back area, and some may not be able to expand outdoors. They just may not have the land.
Right.
So that's issue 1. If you have the land, what are we going to require to call it compact and contiguous? The secondary discussion is, do you want to allow businesses to expand their operations into publicly controlled and operated areas? And that's, that's the policy discussion. Do you give up some parking stalls so that that are publicly controlled so that a business can operate in there? And that is, Scott, you touched on it, those parklets or whatever we're calling them. Well, I've worked on that issue, and it is, is it compact? And the contiguous is the issue. It's definitely compact. And so we can look into that. But if there's direction to, I think one issue is the fence. I seem to hear some, agreement on that issue. How do we expand operations into a public area? That is something we have to look at, because if it's just a temporary thing, is it a liquor license amendment? And so we just want to make sure, if we're in support of it, just the process, so we don't over-encumber it. But you are allowing one entity to use a public area at that point for a business consideration, and it's just something to consider.
And the other thing to consider when allowing them to use the public right-of-way, and it touches on the contiguous, and if that causes problems, is they need the areas, the sidewalks still need to be ADA accessible as well.
And if I may, the toolkit from Minneapolis, they have the dimensions for ADA as well to accommodate ADA, and then just also different things to consider in your design, like drainage from the side or from the parking spot. So there are some things that have been done that might, enhance, some of these spaces and still, provide some criteria.
Are these parklets, are they permanent then, or are they
They're seasonal, they're temporary.
temporary? So they move them, or
Yeah, they're not conducive to plowing snow.
no? So where do they go?
That's up to the business. But
Up to the business?
The few that I've seen seem to be very movable, if you will. It's usually just building with some 2x4s and wood, and I've seen them just loaded up on the trucks and moved. But they are meant to be seasonal. Now, we all have instances where I know that some businesses were allowed to bring in the white tents and the heaters during the winter, and all of that's COVID. That was meant to be stopgap.
The bubbles,
Yeah,
the igloos?
right.
Councilmember?
So what if, let's say, obviously we're mindful of the temporary, the COVID stuff, but on Friday nights during the car show, it's a standalone event on its own, and the road is shut down. So what if some of these establishments wanted to just on Friday nights set up temporary seating like they did? Is that, fall under the car show category, or is it kind of?
You still need an area. The idea of serving beer and being able to just walk the streets, the liquor license isn't going to allow that, because you have to consume it in that compact and contiguous premise.
But if an establishment wanted to set up something, like what we're talking about, but only do it during the car shows?
What we've done in the past?
Yeah,
Or what we
we've
did?
done some temporary
During
licenses
COVID.
and stuff of that nature, but again, it hasn't allowed them to roam the streets.
No.
And yeah, that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about like Roddy's situation where they had something set up in front of their in front of their business, and it was like their outdoor patio, but it was clearly.
I think we've done things on a temporary basis.
Okay.
Just, I don't recall your exact code provision on that. But it's still, just to be clear, it allows them to expand the facility, but it still needs to be in a compact and contiguous area.
Councilmember Peterson?
Throwing a wrench in there. How about those tables and the chairs? Because I've been getting asked about that from that last bar meeting we had. Has that been,
Yeah, we discussed it at the planning commission, and I think we decided on more commercial grade materials. So, we have some examples that I think Lisa Ritchie will provide to the businesses, just to give some options.
kind of anxious before the car show to get something squared away? But of course, the
Fair enough.
fencing, that's probably more important right now.
I was gonna say, right now,
Yep.
they're not allowed to do it,
No.
so, is what I'm hearing.
The roaming around,
No, not the roaming, but the picnic tables outside, all that was allowed during COVID.
Yep.
It was a temporary,
right.
temporary,
We can make some of those public spaces available, but again, I don't want COVID to become well, we did it last year. We pushed on some stuff on that. That isn't the rules anymore. We would need to define the area. We would need to try and delineate it or just make it clear where the area of service is. If you want to have some outdoor tables, you can do that, but again, it needs to be within a certain area. We have to decide whether we want to allow it on public property, things of that nature.
so is that something that we could work with, try to rewrite this ordinance?
Or I'm not sure where that ordinance is, if it even exists, but I'll take a look and see what is on the books in terms of seating out on the public right-of-way and provide some ideas or options in terms of how to make it a little bit more flexible. A lot of communities do allow it, but the limitations are basically related to the amount of land on the sidewalk. And if you've got a very narrow sidewalk, you still need to make sure you're in, there's adequate room for the public to walk through.
No, and that's it. And candidly, some business, when I've seen it, because you still need to have the ADA, you still need to have the accessibility. And so candidly, some businesses, because of their location, won't qualify. Or it just won't make sense because of their location on a corner or something like that. So that's, not everyone will get the same opportunity.
Right.
I think that's something we can look into, is whether these kind of, I'll call them like satellite patio areas in the right-of-way would be doable, what it would take, what some of the pros and cons would be. So that's certainly something we can look into.
I would add that you're in the process of updating your downtown revitalization plan, and one of the goals is to make it a more lively, walkable downtown environment where you can see people are here. Having a couple of chairs outside of a coffee shop where there's some casual coffee drinking going on is probably not a bad thing. You may not want to have people drinking pints of beer. Maybe you do, I don't know. But yeah, we take a look and see what the options are.
So right now, Love's Ice Cream has some tables outside for coffee. Under the ordinance, are they allowed to do that?
I have no idea. So, candidly, sometimes things just show up. I don't know if that was asked for or if it was just put out there.
That's why I close my eyes when I walk around.
Walking into buildings. But alcohol is different than coffee.
It is. There's that extra layer of you cannot leave the defined premises with booze. Putting a table out and maybe having a display of an antique or allowing people to sit and drink coffee, you don't have any of the liquor licensing. That's just then hey, this is the city's right-of-way, you're obstructing it, please move your stuff. And the alcohol is just another layer.
Yeah, okay. All right, do we have enough information?
I believe so, yeah.
Yes, I do. So it sounds like we need to act quickly because you've got people wanting to build things and
Yeah.
possibly sit outside. So this will probably be coming forward shortly.
Okay. Soren, you got anything to add, or? All right. That's it?
Yeah, I've just, we're very fortunate to have Brandy in this capacity, so thanks to Brandy and her team for doing this work for us.
Thank you, Brandy.
Welcome.
Appreciate it.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Anybody else got anything to add to it? If not, we got nothing else? Motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Moved by Councilmember Wong.
Second.
Second by Councilmember Peterson. Any discussion? Not all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? We are adjourned till 6:30. 6:06.